Hello and welcome to the first video in the Microsoft Azure IaaS Architecture Best Practices for ARM series. I'm Jeff Langford, a Cloud Solutions Architect with the Microsoft State and Local Government team. In this section, we will be discussing some of the key best practices for designing and implementing an Azure virtual machine infrastructure using the Azure Resource Manager portal. The first best practice we're going to talk about is the use of consistent naming conventions throughout your Azure environment. This is perhaps the most important part of the best practices discussed in this series. Without consistent naming applied to every resource, it can become very challenging to rapidly identify, find, or manage specific resources within the environment. However, if you start with a consistent naming convention from the very beginning, it will make it easy to manage everything. A few of the different naming conventions are listed on this slide. We'll start with the resource groups. These are all prefaced with the letters RG, which immediately identify it as a resource group, followed by the region that they are deployed in. After that is the specific type or subtype of group, followed by a specific workload. For instance, the first one listed here indicates a resource group in the West US region that contains all of the virtual machines for the identity workload. The second one indicates the resource group that contains all of the network elements for the West US region. For the next section, we cover the networking related naming convention. If you look at the first one in this list, it describes the virtual network named VNet West and indicates the gateway for that VNet. The next one is the public IP address for that gateway. The next one indicates an internal load balancer for the SharePoint SQL servers in the West US region. After that is a public load balancer for the ADFS proxy servers in the West US region. Storage accounts utilize a different naming convention since they are globally unique DNS names. As such, we need to use a convention that will rapidly identify it uniquely for your organization. This is accomplished by using a short prefix describing your organization. In this case, we are using SPNW for shorthand for SharePoint Northwest, the fictitious company used for this scenario. For a government agency, a recommended prefix would be something like WAGov for the state of Washington government, or WADOT for Washington State Department of Transportation. Using this convention, you can see that the first entry in the list indicates the storage account for the identity VMs in the West US region for SPNW. Virtual machines use a simple naming convention here, indicating the region and the role. If you have a standard machine naming convention in place today, many enterprises simply prefix an AZ to the front of the name to indicate that it is in Azure. Let's talk about some of the different containers that are used in Azure. The first one is resource groups. They are the top level containers to group like objects together. For instance, all networking components in a region, or virtual machines that are part of a specific workload, such as identity, SharePoint, or database. Storage accounts are where you can store different types of data, including virtual hard disks for your virtual machines. It is recommended that multiple storage accounts are used for different workloads, depending on your IOPS requirements. For instance, you may use several standard storage accounts for a single virtual machine if that VM requires fast input-output to storage. A SQL Server is a good example. Another option is to use premium storage accounts, which use dedicated SSD drives and have much higher input-output than standard hard disks. When designing virtual networks in Azure, it is highly recommended that you create multiple subnets with your address space. This makes it easy to apply network security groups to the individual subnets so that you can lock them down to allow or disallow specific types of traffic or destinations. The workload scenario that we will be building in this video series is shown here. This will include 2 virtual networks, one for each Azure region, 3 private virtual network connections, 2 of which are site-to-site connections between on-premises and Azure, and another one is VNet to VNet VPN connecting the West and East regions together. The servers are created in different subnets and resource groups depending on their individual requirements. They are also split across multiple storage accounts. In this table, you can see all of the specific resources and components that every virtual machine will use. It indicates the name of the VM, its static IP address, which subnet it's deployed in, the load balancer that it will be a part of if it's necessary for that particular workload, the availability set that it is in, its size, the top level resource groups that it belongs to, and the primary storage account it uses for its virtual hard disks. This slide contains some information that you will need to gather before you start building your Azure environments. Careful planning is required for your virtual networks, as some things cannot be changed after they're created. Be sure to allocate IP address space that is larger than you initially anticipate requiring. It is almost certain that you will eventually add additional resources to your Azure cloud environment, so allowing for room to grow is essential. For instance, if you intend to use a single /24 subnet in Azure for a couple of specific workloads, allocating a /22 now will save you more work later when you eventually run out of address space. You will need to know your internal IP address space that your machines in Azure need to connect back to via the site-to-site VPN. At the very least, they will need to get to your internal domain controllers, DNS servers, and other enterprise management servers. You can always add or remove IP ranges later, but you will need at least one IP range initially, typically for your domain controllers. In order to create the VPN connection to your edge device, you need to know the public IP address of your VPN device. It is also important to know if your device is route-based or policy-based. It is highly recommended to create route-based or dynamic routing VPNs instead of policy-based or static routing ones. All advanced Azure networking features require route-based gateways, so you will be limited in your capabilities if you implement a policy-based gateway in Azure. Planning for your virtual machines is also essential. While it's easy to simply spin up a VM on an as-needed basis, it is important to understand all of the requirements of the workload that will be running on that particular VM. It may require specific network security groups, multiple storage accounts, or other such requirements. Another thing to plan for up front is the regions that you are targeting. Depending on your physical location, your regional pairs may be north, south, or east-west. While you are certainly free to deploy workloads in any desired region, it is important to choose a desired primary and secondary region. The full listing of the videos in this series is listed here. In the next video, we will continue the build out of our Azure infrastructure by creating the virtual networks. We will continue towards completion of the full scenario in the next videos. For now, let's continue this video by actually logging on to the Azure Portal and creating our resource groups and storage accounts. These are the resource groups that we're going to create. Let's get started. Okay, we've logged on to the Azure Portal, which is portal.azure.com, or if you're logging on to the government portal, it is portal.azure.us. This is the dashboard screen, which is the initial point where you'll be taken when you log on. But what we want to do now is create resource groups. So we're going to go ahead and click on resource groups and go in here. And you'll see that I currently have 0 resource groups because this is a brand new environment. I'm going to go ahead and go up here and I'm going to click on add. This blade will go ahead and populate, and now it's going to ask me for the resource group name. In this case, we're just going to follow our naming convention like we described earlier, and I'm going to create the network resource group. This is my subscription, and my resource group location, where I want to put all of these, is in West US. I'm going to go ahead and click on create. You can see over here, It says creating, and now it's done. If I refresh this here, it shows up. I'm going to go ahead and continue, and I'm going to go ahead and build out the rest of our resource groups here. RG-West-VM for my virtual machines, and this is for the identity workload. Same thing, need to make sure that we get it in the right region. We want this to be in West US. Click on Create. That one's done, and we'll just continue on down. RG-West-VM-SharePoint. Again, taking care to select the proper region. Okay, RG West VM database. West US, go ahead and create it, and there we go. If I go ahead and refresh this, these are the 4 that we've created here. So these are all of the West resource groups that we will need. I'm now going to do the same for the East. This is RG-East-Network. Select my region. In this case, it is East US. Click on Create. Go on down the line, add the next ones. East VM identity, location, East US, and create. You can see this is very easy to do. I'm going to go ahead, select the right one, East, and then I've got one more to do, and that's the database one, RG-East-VM-database. Put it in the East, and there we go. Okay, that was very easy to do. Go ahead and click on refresh here. We should see all of them. So now we've got East and we've got West. And if you look over here, location, these are all the East ones, these are all the West ones. So we're done with our resource groups. That was pretty easy. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create the storage accounts that we need. Okay, so we're going to click on the new here, and we go into storage, and I'm going to click over here, storage account. Okay, and so now it's going to ask me for the name. And remember, this has to be a globally unique DNS name. So in this case, I'm going to start it with my identifier, which is SPNW. And this is going to be the West US region. This is for my VMs and the identity workload. So this is the name that I'm going to use. I want Resource Manager as the deployment model. And here you can change what type, whether you want just blob storage or general purpose. In this case, it's general purpose because these are going to be for virtual machines. I'm just going to do this as standard performance. And then here you choose the replication. The replication is locally redundant, geo-redundant, read access geo-redundant, or zone redundant. For this particular scenario, we're just going to build out locally redundant storage. Now, locally redundant storage means that it has 3 copies of all of the data on 3 different drives throughout that particular region. So there's multiple copies to work from. We're not going to enable subscription here, encryption here, but if we wanted to, we could. Just going to choose my subscription. I'm in the right one. In the resource group, I could create a new one here, but I don't need to because I already pre-created them. So I'm going to go ahead and use existing. I'm going to go ahead and select the right one. And so I'm going to put that in West US. So I need to make sure that this is my West US identity VM resource group. And the location for that, of course, is in West US. So I make sure I get the right one, and if these all match up, it looks good. I'll go ahead and click on create. Okay, it went ahead and validated it, and now it's deploying it. I can go ahead and click here, and I can see everything that I've done so far, and I see the status of this. The deployment has started, so it's starting to build out that storage account right now. In the meantime, let's just go back and let's just continue to build these. Let's get all of our storage accounts in place. Our next one, SPNW, West US, VM, SP for SharePoint, Resource Manager, General Purpose, Standard. Replication is going to be locally redundant, no encryption required. We're going to use an existing resource group, and in this case, it is in the SharePoint resource group, and the location, of course, is West US. Go ahead and click on create there. Went ahead and validated it. Successful, and now it'll pop up here. It's creating it. Okay, let's continue on. Storage account. SPNW, West US, VM, DB for database, Resource Manager, and it's general purpose, but in this case, because this is the database tier, we want it to be in premium storage. So our replication is local redundant storage, which is our only option here for premium storage. I still don't want it to be encrypted. It's the same subscription. I'm going to go ahead and choose the proper resource group for this. And this is VM database in West US. I'm going to go ahead and click on create. Validating it, and it's kicking off that deployment now. Okay, so let's go back here. Let's look at all resources, and we can see everything that's happened so far. Click on refresh. It's still deploying this one. We have this storage account for SharePoint, this storage account for identity. The database one is being deployed right now. Okay, we're going to go ahead and add one more here to the west. Storage account. In this particular storage account, also in West US, is for VMs, but this is the Diag. So this is the storage account that all of the diagnostic logs for all of the virtual machines are going to be placed in. A common best practice is to create a separate storage account just for the diagnostics. So that's what we're doing here. When we go in later and create the VMs, you'll see how we point to this particular storage account for that purpose. General purpose, standard. Again, we're going to change this to locally redundant. Don't need encryption. Let's use an existing resource group, and we will just go ahead and put this one in the VM for SharePoint. Okay, West US. We'll say create. And away it goes. Okay. Go back here, look at all resources, and you can see that here's our database one, and it went ahead and finished the creation of that as well. I'll go ahead and let the rest of these continue to deploy out, but that's really it for this video. We have gone through the naming conventions, some of the best practices around, grouping. We've defined what a resource group is and what a storage account is. We've gone ahead and created our resource groups and our storage accounts. So we'll end this video here now, and you can feel free to come back and look at the second video in the series, which is where we're going to actually continue the build out, and we're going to actually create both of the virtual networks in our West region and our East region. Thank you.